Steve, thank you for joining us. Steve Howe, State Representative Steve Howe, and I was wanting to just get you up here in our new office and talk to you a little bit about, I guess, your journey, how you got started, where you're from. So maybe you could take me back to, I guess, where you grew up being a kid. And
Okay. Thanks, John. I appreciate you having me on your podcast, and
yeah.
glad to be in your new building downtown. It's quite the improvement. Um, just seeing the streetscape here reminds me of when I first came to Salina back in 2005, and Salina downtown was virtually somewhat empty in the sense of the retail spaces that were just vacant or boarded up and things like that. My wife and I moved here in 2005, started a business in 2007. It's right across the street behind me at the Tamara House School of Dance. And so just to see all the community support over the years with downtown, really have a deep sense of appreciation for all the community leaders that stepped up to put their private money in the real estate downtown. So, but before I came to Salina, I was working on Capitol Hill for U.S. Congressman at the time, Jerry Moran.
Did you grow up? I guess let me back up a
Yeah.
little bit. Did you grow up so you're a Kansas native? You grew up in Kansas?
Yes, Kansas native. Was born in Manhattan, Kansas.
Gotcha. And farmer, is that right? Your dad was a farmer or no?
Yeah. So I was born there. My dad farmed his whole life. My mom was a nurse. And I had two brothers, and we grew up on a farm, a small farm, just outside of Manhattan, north of the Manhattan airport. And we had wheat, soybeans, Milo was our three staple crops. We also had apple orchards growing up, which was a really fond memory of picking apples in September, and we would take those apples to the farmer's market, and even at one time sold to Dillon's in Manhattan.
That's awesome. I guess I don't even think of like apple orchards in Kansas. So is that a finicky crop in Kansas or?
It can be, certainly the weather. Back then, it was before you could insure your specialty crop like apples.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the improvements that have been made through the Farm Bill at the federal level, is the ability to insure some of those specialty crops. We just had too many bad freezes, and it just was devastating to the production of those trees. And apple trees are only mature for production for a certain amount of time. And so I applaud those that continue to make a living doing that, but there's not too many in Kansas anymore.
And then did you go to high school in Manhattan then too, Steve? Or?
I did. I lived on the south side of the hill, which was kind of a dividing line. So I went to Manhattan Public Schools. I went to the smallest grade school there. It was Eugene Field, and went all the way through high school there. And a lot has changed in Manhattan even. The elementary school I went to is not even open anymore. And the middle school that I attended became the ninth grade center for the high school over there, and I'm not even sure if they use it anymore, if they've moved the ninth graders back to the high school campus. But it is a large high school. At the time when I went there, it was the largest high school in Kansas with nearly 2,000 students. But now there's much bigger high schools in the Kansas City area and Wichita.
Yeah.
So.
And then from there, did you end up going to college, or what did you do after that?
I did. It seemed like the thing to do after high school, at least I was being told, and everywhere I would go, you were kind of told, like, college is the next thing.
Step,
And I didn't really know what I wanted to study, but I went to college and did it. I took some time off after about 2.5 years to kind of live in some other parts of the country. I lived in Colorado for a while, then I lived in Maine, just doing different jobs, and then I came back to school to finish up. But I went to Kansas State University, graduated in 2002 with a degree, or Bachelor of Science degree in speech, and they don't even offer that degree anymore. That's how much things have changed. They've uh, repurposed that major as communication studies at Kansas State University. Basically, it was the study of rhetoric with an emphasis in political communication. So I ended up doing a little bit of what I ended up studying in college, or at least being able to utilize some of that content that I learned.
In like politics or whatever, is what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then how did your interest in politics start, or how, like, where did that all?
I think a lot of it just started at the dinner table growing up with on a farm and two brothers, and we would argue a lot, and usually we would argue at the dinner table, and some of it was over just facts and figures or what was going on in the world, but oftentimes we would settle our arguments by going to uh, basically it was before the internet, and it was our way of Googling information. And so one of us would run to the Encyclopedia Britannica, and we would look up the answer to whatever question or disputed
Before
fact.
Google?
Yeah. So that's back when, you'd have your bookshelf with an encyclopedia set.
Yeah.
And so we would go look up something, a fact or figure, about whatever we were discussing, and try to settle the argument if we could. But probably at the dinner table, we would talk about current events and what was going on in the world. And so I think it really just started there at the dinner table with my parents and two brothers. Also did 4-H,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a schoolhouse down the road from us, about a half a mile. And it was an old schoolhouse, but it was used for our local 4-H club. And I learned a lot about civics and government and parliamentary procedure and public speaking and all sorts of things. So I think 4-H helped guided me in that direction as well.
And then who was the first, I guess, or how did you get, who was the first person that you started kind of helping then or got involved, and what did that look like?
Sure. After graduating from Kansas State University, I applied for an internship on Capitol Hill, and I was accepted and did that for Jerry Moran for 5 months. And I went during the spring semester because I graduated in December. And went out that spring and spent 5 months. And this was the lead up to the war in Iraq. So this is the spring of 2003. So there was a lot going on in the world post 9/11. And so it was very interesting. Each day was different. And I did that for nearly 3 years, or not the internship for 3 years, but I did that for 5 months. Then after the 5 months was done, I was offered a position on his official staff. So I stayed out there for another 2.5 years before moving back to Salina. And I moved to Salina to work for Jerry Moran. He opened an office in the United Life building,
Okay.
just downtown Salina. And he didn't have an office in Salina, but it was his largest community back here in the district. And so that was a stepping stone to get back home. And I loved being out in the Washington, D.C. area, but it's very expensive, and I was kind of homesick. So it was good to get home.
Then did you work for a couple of other people after Jerry Moran, or who else have you all worked with?
Yeah, so I continued to work for Jerry Moran for another 5 years, and I left his staff in 2010 to work on some congressional campaigns. So I worked on 2 congressional campaigns, and then after that, Jerry Moran's predecessor was Tim Hulskamp. He was from Fowler, Kansas, and he got the Republican nomination, then won the general election in 2010. And he asked me to come on his staff to lead his district operations. So we had an office here in Salina, Dodge City, and Hutchinson. And eventually we opened one in Manhattan after that was added to the district, after redistricting, because that redistricting is done every 10 years based off of the census numbers and what the populations are. So things have changed a little bit in the districts over the years. And I would like to say Kansas is a growing state population-wise, but it is. growing ever so slightly, and it is growing in a handful of communities or a handful of counties in the state. And so that's one of the challenges I think we have to figure out is how do we move many of our communities forward in a positive direction where people want to live, work, and play.
Yeah, I
raise a
remember
family.
when my wife and I settled on Salina, or I shouldn't say settled, when we're like when we were looking for the community we want to put our family. Part of our way of deciding Salina was we wanted still a growing county, and so that's what we ended up doing, trying to find like the counties we're growing in. I think at the time maybe there was like 10 in the state of Kansas. I can't remember the number, but it's like it's very low, you know. I have obviously that Sedgwick County, and then obviously Johnson, some of those other areas, and then the other thing was obviously for community wise, we wanted to still kind of feel like we were in a big enough city where there were some different things going on, but still we felt small enough, like raise our family, we felt comfortable. So yeah, that's kind of also how we decided on Salina. I guess what was my other question? So then after, who was it? Did you say Tim Hulskamp?
Yeah, Tim Hulskamp.
Hulskamp. Then
Yeah.
from there, did you start your kind of state representative journey, or how did that kind of come about?
Well, so I worked for Tim Hulskamp, Congressman Hulskamp, for the full 6 years he was in office. He lost in the primary election in 2016 to Roger Marshall. And so I stayed with Hulskamp's office until January of 2017. Then I had to go find something else to do. And so I did that. And it was kind of nice to get out of politics for a while because I had been doing it for over 13 years at that point. And so it was nice to step back and kind of reevaluate things. And I had a job for a while that I would go to work and I'd leave work and I'd leave work at work. And that was the first time that had happened in quite some time. So it was kind of a nice step back and kind of reassess what I wanted to do and just place more time and focus on family. But in 2020, I was teaching fifth grade at Cornerstone Classical School here in Salina. And we were in Topeka for the Fine Arts Festival at Care Paravel, which is another classical school in Topeka. And it was the day before spring break. And little did I know that that would be the last day that we were all together, because the week after is when the governor declared that all schools would be closed for the remainder of the year, and we wouldn't be coming back after spring break for in-person classes. So we were in the COVID pandemic, and it was starting to hit Kansas more. There was a lot of unknowns at the time, and so I ended up teaching for another 10 weeks, just virtual classes, recording classes on YouTube and doing Zoom classes and trying to make the best of the situation, especially for the kids. But during that time, I read an article that said over 60% of the Kansas legislature is at risk for COVID, meaning that they're all mostly older individuals. And I thought, there's not too many people in my season of life representing Kansans up in the legislature.
Yeah.
Perhaps it would be good to have someone that had younger kids and was in that season of life to kind of represent, my generation a little bit.
Yeah.
And I had discussed it with my wife a little bit, and she said, "Well, Stephen, you're not getting any younger, so you might as well go do it." And so I decided to run, and I filed, and it was successful, and very thankful to all of the people that supported me. And I've been doing it I'm in my fourth year right now, just in my second term. We just adjourned last week, and we may be getting called to go back to Topeka if the governor declares and requests a special session. And that would be to consider a tax bill.
A tax bill for what's that?
Well, tax relief, tax cuts. It's something the Republican-controlled legislature has been pushing all session. We've been trying to the state is sitting on nearly $4 billion in surplus taxpayer money. And we believe that it's critical that the state just doesn't bank taxpayer money. It's not a good look, and probably not a good policy.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that people are being overtaxed, and we need to return some of that money and provide some tax relief, not only in the short term but long term, in making it sustainable for years to come. There is a fear that if there's an economic downturn, there's going to be a downturn in revenue that comes to the state, which, you know, what services are you going to cut when that happens? And so a tax relief bill needs to be sustainable and realistic. We've been trying to work on a tax bill. The governor's vetoed every tax bill that we've sent her. Always found something wrong with it. Right now in the state of Kansas, there's a 3-tier income tax structure. And we've proposed doing a single rate tax code. Many other states have gone to that model and are seeing growth in population and growth of business investment in their state. And so we feel like this 3-tier income tax structure is probably not on the cutting edge of where we need to be as a state in order to.
So what does that look like then? Like, are they doing that with like withholdings, or how does that exactly go?
So right now in the state of Kansas, there's a top tier. I want to say it's around 5.75. Then there's a middle tier. I think it's around 5.25. Then a lower tier, it's like 3.8%. So it's really
the percent they're getting taxed.
Mm-hmm.
And this is on their payroll, or is that what you're saying? Like on their
personal income tax.
Personal income tax. Okay.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's not terribly high compared to some states which are really high, but there are some states that do not have any income tax at the state level. And so a lot of states are looking for ways to be competitive for not only business investment, but talent and people. And that's something we've struggled with over the years, is out-migration, and a lot of people going to Texas from all over. A lot of people going to Florida because it's considered tax-friendly. And so we're trying to push those things, but the governor hasn't found a good reason to sign our bill yet. We were short on an override attempt this session, but I think we're short by about 2 votes. You have to have a supermajority in both the House and the Senate to override a governor's veto. So in the House, that would mean you would need 84 votes. In the Senate, you would need 27.
So as far as like the House representatives, there's 4 representatives for the state of Kansas. Is that right then?
Well, so at the federal level, there's 4 U.S. representatives representing the state of Kansas up in Washington, D.C. But I serve with 125 members.
Gotcha.
Or actually 124. I'm 125. So of my colleagues, that's in the House. Then there's 40 senators. And so each House district represents roughly 24,000 people. And so my district is, well, we're in my district right now, but if you go across the street to the west on the west side of Santa Fe, then you're in a different district.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so it kind of jogs around. The borders aren't, at 90-degree angles at all points because they have to carve out different neighborhoods to get the populations within a certain percentage. Yeah. There's like a margin of error.
Yeah.
They try to keep those populations within. So they're basically the same.
So it's like a state representative. Are you mainly working on like currently new bills? Is that what your primarily job is, to new bills that are being proposed, or to work on bills, or?
Yeah, I mean, so each member is assigned to different committees. And so when I got reelected last election, I was asked by the Speaker-elect, Speaker of the House, to serve as chairman of the Higher Education Budget Committee. And that committee oversees the state spending on our higher education institutions, which would include our 6 regent universities: University of Kansas, Kansas State University, Wichita State University, Fort Hays State University, Pittsburgh State University, and Emporia State University. Then you have 7 technical colleges, including Salina Area Technical College here. Then you have about 20 independent or non-for-profit private colleges or universities. That would be like Kansas Wesleyan. And so we make budget recommendations to another committee as they're putting the state budget together. And so I also serve on that other committee, which is the Appropriations Committee. So they're responsible for making a budget.
Yeah. What do you see the major challenges? I guess we were talking about that a little bit. One of them, Kansas as far as growing, but what do you see the major challenges for Kansas right now?
I think the biggest challenge right now is, I guess if I would have to single out one thing, it would be population, and looking at demographics. Of course, there's going to be changes to demographics. A lot of people will move depending on career and opportunity, and so I think that's the biggest challenge is keeping talent here in Kansas. We have 2 high schools here in Salina. You've got 2 country schools, southeast of Saline, and we graduate seniors every year, and they go off to college or Votech or some other trade school. But we want to try to make it to where they see opportunity in the communities in which they grow up in. And now some people like to fly away from the nest for a while, but hopefully maybe they would miss it enough to want to come back someday, because they see it as a safe environment to raise a family, a place that has some of the amenities or quality of life aspects that make it fun and an inviting place to be. But I think that's one of the big things Kansas is struggling with is if you look between 2020 and 2022, the U.S. Census Bureau released their population estimates, and their report suggested that there was population decline in 76 of the 105 Kansas counties. And that's not a good trend, but I think it's probably been a trend that's been going on for well over 100 years. It used to be at one point in time you could, support or have more people on the family farm, but those family farms, it was harder and harder to support, the amount of kids. And so more people had to move off the farm, or more people were drawn to the big city lights for other opportunities and things like that. And so there's been a naturally occurring out-migration for a while. It's just getting to the point to where it's critical for communities. They're either going to make it or break it. And the state can come in and try to support them and some housing incentives or some other opportunities. But at the end of the day, if people aren't wanting to go back home, to rural areas or things like that, it's going to be a really tough road ahead for many Kansas communities. So I think we have to look at a different way of governing today as well, especially in Kansas. You have 105 counties, and that's a lot of different units of government. You have a lot of Kansas school districts, and so maybe looking forward, I think the people that are going to survive all these demographic challenges are going to be the ones that are forward thinking enough to make changes to today and not wait till tomorrow where it's too late. So
yeah, I think that's where Salina's really stepped up their game as of late. I'm a pretty big fan of Mike Hoppick, our mayor, and just kind of the forward thinking and him not being afraid to talk to people and trying to grow our community and entice the younger people to come back to it, our area. And so that's just obviously something you have to do. And it's interesting to me, no different than when you're talking about what the state of Kansas needs to do, but you're kind of looking at it. Obviously you're a business owner too, but you're almost looking at it almost like a business, right? Like you're like, okay, what do we got to do to
Mm-hmm.
get people over here and trying to make the changes that you need to. So, what was another question I had for you? Like as far as politics go, like what do you feel is like a major like what do you feel is like a major obstacle right now with like politics? It feels like very obviously like opposite, right? Like I mean, I don't know. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
seem like it can't that you people can get further apart. Do you feel that too? Like on when you go to Topeka or Capitol Hill, do you still feel like it is that way, or is that what's your perception on it?
I think it's certainly more the case, John, in Washington D.C. at the federal level
Yeah.
that it's really just it's been broken for years, and it's become more politically polarized, and it's unfortunate. They have some basic duties that the federal government should be doing, and one is to try to balance a budget. You know, they're not required to balance a budget like we are at the state level, so
Mm-hmm.
that's one big difference. We cannot spend more than we take in, although there are some out year obligations that will come due
Mm-hmm.
at the state level that we have to be aware of. But I think just it's become its own niche industry. Politics has. I mean, you have talk shows, you have 24/7 news media that profits off the ability to create controversy or create something to talk about. I mean, it gives them more opportunity to sell advertisement and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So I think it's become a little bit more of a niche industry than it used to. You know, when I grew up, you'd watch the evening news and there was some advertisement there, but now it's, you know, predominant. It's much more of a focal point than it used to be, and I just think it's become its own industry, and there's a lot of people that profit off of the dysfunction, but the real losers are the American people, because they're left with um, people that aren't willing to govern and maybe aren't willing to even compromise on some things because they're too concerned about sticking their chest out and trying to
Right.
make a name for themselves. So that's unfortunate. But I think at the state level, I feel a lot more camaraderie, a lot more willingness to put aside uh, personal beliefs for the betterment of the state, and a willingness to accept, hey, we've got to move forward.
Or at least have a conversation.
At least have a conversation. Yeah, the ability to agree to disagree on things, I think, is important.
Yeah, I
It doesn't
totally agree.
mean you have to, hate the other person just because you're at a disagreement. You know, there is the art of persuasion, trying to figure out how you can bring someone over to your side on an issue. But you might not be able to do that all the time. So you have to figure out other areas you can connect with someone on. So, yeah, I think at the state level, uh, there's a lot of great people on both sides of the aisle up there. It's pretty interesting because you really see the diversity of the representation up there. I sit next to a retired three-star general to my left on the House floor. Then to my right is and uh, he was a Vietnam veteran as
Mm-hmm.
well. And the guy to the right of me is a Vietnam veteran as well. But he was a wildlife biologist, and so he's got a lot of expertise in just wildlife and biology and things like that. And it's very interesting to hear them both talk about their professional life. Then there's me, who's not retired and still kind of in the middle years of my life and raising a family and whatnot. So it's just really neat to get to know some of these people from different parts of the state and their life experience. So.
How often do you have to, what's the word, rerun or go back up for election? How does,
So I serve a 2-year term.
okay.
So my term will end in January of 2025. And so I'm up for election this year, and I plan to file when I go back to Topeka, which will likely be the special session that the governor calls for us to come back to get a tax bill. So that might be in the next week or so.
So, and then I guess one of my other questions I was just thinking of, just like the tax bill in general. And I guess my overall feeling from some of the bills sometimes is like, um, a lot of times we have some decent bills, but it's like it also feels like a lot of times there's like they try to sneak some stuff in there. Is that pretty common, you would say, with?
Unfortunately, I would say so. Probably less so with the tax bills
Mm.
because the tax bills that we've put together have dealt with the income tax, the state income tax, the state sales tax on food, um, Social Security income tax, and property tax. So those have been a little bit more transparent than some other bills. I think the bills that get stuff snuck in are the budget bills. So we did a budget bill towards the end of March, and that got signed into law. And when we came back in April, around mid-April is when the state gets its what it's called consensus revenue estimates.
Mm-hmm.
There's a consensus revenue estimate working group, and they basically update their financial forecast. So right now, the state of Kansas is in fiscal year 2024, and the new fiscal year will start on July 1st of this year, but it'll be fiscal year 25, although we're still in calendar year 24. So it's a little confusing because the fiscal year at the state level goes in a different time period than the federal fiscal year.
Okay.
The federal fiscal year starts on October 1 and will go for the remainder of those months. But nonetheless, this consensus revenue estimate group comes back and they have updated estimate numbers for us for caseloads. Those would be people perhaps receiving benefits on Medicaid, or people in the people that might be receiving disability services or other social services. So they update those numbers, and we have a better idea of how much we're actually going to need to spend. So we have this secondary budget bill that's called the omnibus budget bill. And so we update some of these numbers to have a better picture of the next fiscal year, and some things get added in that bill. Before we left last week, there was an attempt to add or do something for the Kansas City Chiefs, because there's rumors flying around.
I was going to ask about that. The Chiefs. Yeah.
They may. So they had a ballot initiative in Jackson County, Missouri. I think it was April 8th. It was for sales tax. It was going to help fund part of their stadium renovations or help keep them in Kansas City alive and well for years to come. But that failed, and so now there's a lot of talk going around
for
about
Kansas trying to put
So Kansas is looking. There's people in Kansas, even the governor's looking at how can we entice the Kansas City Chiefs to move across the state lines to Kansas. There's other states that are looking at Kansas City as well. And so I don't know if it's just a bunch of speculation and hype, but things like that tend to get added. Little incentive packages. They're not little incentive packages. What they're proposing, I think, is a change in the star bond incentive, which right now we're in downtown Salina. We're in a star bond district, or at least part of Salina is in a star bond district. And basically, the sales tax generated in those districts would help pay for parts of the project. I think right now it's around 50% of like a star bond project could be paid for with those tax revenues coming back. But I think the proposal for the Kansas City Chiefs is to make it 100% over a 30-year term. And that would be a proposed stadium site in Wyandotte County, over by the Kansas Speedway somewhere. So there's a lot of speculation, but I'm not sure it's in the best interest of Kansans to do something so grandiose So I guess I'd be interested to hear from your listeners, John, before I go back to Topeka, what their priorities are. But it does seem like some of these stadium projects, at least with public money, turn out to be big losers.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, these NFL owners are billionaires anyways, and oftentimes they're trying to see how much they can squeeze taxpayers.
For sure, they're looking to line their pockets for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Are we going to get more affordable tickets to their games?
Yeah.
The same thing is with the World Cup. In the budget bill this year, there was like over $30 million for the World Cup in Kansas City. They're already coming to Kansas City.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're not going to come. But there's a big push in the Kansas City area to do all these extra things to make the experience good for these international visitors.
I suppose that their argument probably is, hey, listen, I mean, it's probably always like, hey, the businesses, right? Like these businesses will flourish. If we bring them to Kansas, we're going to bring the money to Kansas, right? I mean, that's always probably, I'm sure, their take on it.
Yeah, there's always that concern for image and what image are we going to project on an international stage. And I think those things are good to be concerned about. But at the end of the day, they already chose Kansas City partly because of the image and all the amenities they can provide. So what can we do in addition?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that might be a little excessive. That was a concern I had with the budget bill, is adding all this extra funding for things that aren't.
When do you vote on that?
So that was already included in the first budget bill we did.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a done deal.
I got you.
Yeah. But really my view on government is government shouldn't provide the answers to everything. There are some essential things government should be involved in, whether it's public safety or infrastructure, things that I take for granted every day, like just the infrastructure that allowed me to drive in a vehicle to this building downtown in a relatively short amount of time, and all of the traffic lights that are there for public safety and order and things like that. But there definitely is a push in Topeka or Washington, D.C. to make government into things that are perhaps outside its constitutional bounds. So I do believe in a limited government, and I don't think government should be involved in everything. And unfortunately, I think it is too involved in a lot of areas of business and commerce and things like that. So I think it's important to look for ways that to oppose bad legislation, because it often creates more bureaucracy or more red tape and things like that. So
awesome. Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate you coming down, and great visiting with you. And I guess I look forward to your reelection in January.
Thanks, John. Yeah, the primary election in Kansas is the first Tuesday in August. Okay. So you have your Democrat and Republican primary elections, and if there's like 3 people that wanted to run as Republicans, then I would have some opposition, and same would go for a Democrat. And each party nominates who they want to represent their party. Then they get on the general election ballot the first Tuesday in November. And this year is a huge presidential election year. And so I imagine turnout would be pretty high, but I'm not sure people like either choice. So it'll be an interesting political campaign year. So.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, thanks, John, for having me on your show, and hope to come back sometime.
Yeah, thank you.